If you've got £100,000 sitting in your pension right now, you've probably been told the hard part is over. That's the promise behind the 843 rule, the idea that it takes 8 years to grow your first £100,000, 4 years for the second, and just 3 years for the third, because compound growth speeds up once the pot gets bigger. That story holds up fine if you're 30. If you're 55 to 65, following the exact same rule can undo years of careful saving in a single bad year, because a market drop that lands right before or after you retire does damage a 30-year-old never has to think about. Here's the mechanism the rule leaves out. It assumes a steady 7 or 8% return year after year, like clockwork. Real markets don't move that smoothly, especially in the years right around when people retire. A 20% drop in one bad year can wipe about £80,000 off a £400,000 pension pot. And if you're pulling an income out of that same pot while it happens, the loss can follow you for the rest of your retirement. There's a name for this pattern, and it's called sequence of returns risk. Over the next few minutes, I want to show you why the first £100,000 was never really your biggest hurdle. The first 5 years after you stop working are what actually decide whether you stay comfortable later or run short of cash. I'll also walk you through what I call the 3-2-1 approach, a way of holding your money that most people talking about the 843 rule never mention. I've watched this happen to people who did everything right on paper and still got caught out by it. So if you're in that stretch before retirement and you want to protect what you've spent decades building, stick around and subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. We don't chase quick wins here. We just do the math that keeps you retired. A 20% drop in your first year of retirement isn't just a red number on a screen. On a typical £400,000 pension pot, that's an immediate £80,000 paper loss. And here's the part that makes it worse. If you're taking a monthly income out of that same pot while the market is down, you're not just watching a loss sit there, you're locking it in, because every withdrawal during the downturn sells units you'll never get to buy back at a lower price. But even that £80,000 figure is missing one thing: how long your money actually needs to last, and that depends far more on when the bad year happens than on how bad it is. The 843 rule works off an average. If the market returns 7% a year over 15 years, the numbers look tidy on a spreadsheet, and nobody disputes that part. The problem is that once you retire and start drawing an income from the pot, the order those returns arrive in matters more than the average itself. And that's the part almost nobody explains clearly. This isn't about whether you're a good investor or a bad one. It's about protecting your position as someone who can support themselves through retirement, instead of ending up back at a part-time job at 72 because a downturn landed at the wrong moment. Let's make it concrete. Picture two people, both retiring with £400,000. Call them Portfolio A and Portfolio B. Portfolio A gets hit with a 20% fall in year 1 of retirement. Portfolio B gets hit with the exact same 20% fall, but in year 15 instead. Over 20 years, both portfolios average out to roughly the same return. Portfolio A still runs out of money about 8 years earlier than Portfolio B, purely because A was forced to sell shares at rock-bottom prices just to cover everyday life, while B had years of growth behind it before the same storm arrived. Think about it the way you'd think about a council tax bill or an energy bill. Those still turn up whether the market went up or down that month. Your spending doesn't pause for a downturn, and neither do the units being sold to pay for it. The Financial Conduct Authority has flagged this exact pattern in how people manage pension drawdown, because a downturn that lands early in retirement does more lasting damage than the same downturn arriving later, purely down to timing rather than luck or skill. That's worth remembering the next time somebody tells you retirement investing is simple. And it gets worse once you realize the 843 rule isn't just wrong about the math. It's wrong about where your safest, most reliable growth in the UK actually comes from, and it has nothing to do with the stock market at all. For the 55 to 65 age group, the hardest £100,000 to build was never really sitting in the stock market. It's sitting in HMRC's tax relief, and most people leave a good chunk of it on the table without ever realizing. Here's the mechanism. Instead of chasing an 8% return every year and hoping the market cooperates, you can use your pension annual allowance, which currently sits at £60,000 a year. That's the amount you're allowed to pay into a pension while still getting tax relief on it. Do the math on this. If you're a higher rate taxpayer and you pay £10,000 into your pension, it only actually costs you £6,000 out of your take-home pay, because the other £4,000 comes back to you as tax relief from HMRC. That's an instant 66.7% return before a single pound of it has even been invested in anything. If you pay basic rate tax, you still get an instant 25% boost the moment the money goes in. Most people spend their entire working life thinking about growth first and tax second, because for decades that's roughly the right order when time is still on your side. In your final working decade, that order flips. The extra return from tax relief now often outweighs anything you could reasonably expect the market to hand you in the same year. And it doesn't depend on which fund you picked or how the market behaved that particular day. I used to tell people to focus purely on low-cost index funds and not worry too much about where the money actually sat. I was wrong to ignore how much that tax relief was worth to someone in their final working decade. It's about as close to a guaranteed return as you'll ever find, and the stock market can't touch it. There's a trade-off here, and it's worth being honest about it. An ISA gives you easy access to your money whenever you want it. A pension locks that money away until you're old enough to draw on it, in exchange for that upfront tax relief. There's a deadline creeping up on the ISA side too. From the 6th of April 2027, the amount you can put into a cash ISA drops to £12,000 a year if you're under 65, though the full £20,000 overall ISA allowance stays the same. If you've got spare cash sitting in an ordinary savings account, that's a reason to think about using more of your ISA space now, while the current cash limit still applies. Here's the part that matters most for the long run. Tax relief on a pension contribution isn't something you can claim back later once the tax year has closed. If you don't use this year's annual allowance, most of it is simply gone. The years you leave that relief unclaimed are years you don't get back, no matter how well the market performs afterwards. If you're worried that you started too late to catch up, there's still a specific way to bridge the gap between the day you stop working and the day your state pension actually starts paying out. If the 8-4-3 rule is what got you here, the 3-2-1 approach is what protects you once you arrive. Instead of chasing one growth number, you split your pension into 3 buckets, and each one does a different job. The first bucket holds about 3 years of ordinary spending, sitting somewhere safe and easy to reach, a high-interest savings account or premium bonds. This is the money you actually live on day to day, the one that pays the council tax bill and the weekly food shop, completely separate from anything sitting in the stock market. The second bucket holds roughly 2 years' worth of spending in bonds or other fixed income. It moves far less than shares do, and its only job is to refill bucket 1 when the market goes through a rough patch, so you're never forced to sell shares while they're down just to cover ordinary bills. Most downturns run their course well inside a couple of years, which is exactly why the first 2 buckets are sized the way they are, to get you through the rough stretch without touching the part of your money that's still recovering. The third bucket is your diversified equity portfolio, the long-term growth engine the 8-4-3 rule was originally describing. It's still doing real work here. It's just no longer the only thing standing between you and next month's grocery bill. Picture 2 versions of the same retirement. In the fragile version, you followed the 8-4-3 rule the whole way through, kept everything in shares, and a sharp downturn lands early in your retirement. You have no real choice but to sell at the worst possible time just to cover your living costs, and that loss follows the rest of your plan for years. In the resilient version, you're holding the same total amount of money, split across the 3-2-1 buckets instead. When that same downturn hits and the market drops 20%, you don't sell a single share. You simply draw from your cash bucket while bucket 3 has time to recover, exactly the way portfolio B did earlier. That's the entire difference between the two paths. Same market, same drop, completely different outcome, based on nothing more than how the money was organized before the bad year arrived. But there's something else the 843 rule can't account for at all. What happens when the rules of the system itself shift underneath you, the way the state pension age is doing right now, whether you organized your money well or not? Let's make this real with a specific situation. Say you're 65 now, you've decided to stop working, and you're expecting your state pension to carry you not long after that, the way 66 used to work. Under the DWP's state pension age timetable that started on the 6th of April, 2026, if you were born on or after the 6th of March, 1961, your state pension age is actually 67. That's a full 2 years away, not the 66 a lot of people still have in their head. That's a genuine hole in the plan, not just an inconvenience. 2 years. Without the roughly £12,547 a year, the state pension would have paid you, comes to a shortfall of more than £25,000 that has to come from somewhere else in the meantime. Here's where the 843 rule leaves people exposed. If you've stayed 100% in shares the whole way through and a market correction happens right when you need to bridge that 2-year gap, you're stuck selling investments at a poor price just to cover ordinary living costs, at exactly the moment you can least afford it. Someone who's prepared for this doesn't need to touch the stock market at all to bridge it. Using the lump sum allowance, you can take up to £268,275 in tax-free cash across your pensions and set part of it aside as a bridge fund built specifically for those extra years, money that isn't sitting exposed to whatever the market happens to be doing that particular month. It's the same 3-2-1 thinking from a moment ago, just aimed at a gap the government created rather than one the market created. There's a second squeeze worth knowing about too. The full new state pension for the 2026 to 2027 tax year comes to £241.30 a week, which works out to about £12,547 a year. Your personal tax allowance is £12,570. That leaves a gap of just £23 between the two. So almost any other income sitting on top of your state pension, even a modest private pension payment, is enough to tip you into paying tax. None of this is complicated once it's written down in front of you. So here's the odd part. Why do so many people who understand this math perfectly well still don't act on it in time? It isn't that they're not clever enough to follow the numbers. It's something else entirely, a kind of psychological pattern that shows up again and again in people right around this age, and it's worth naming properly rather than just noting that it exists. If you look at the 843 rule and feel a small stab of guilt because you didn't start at 30, you're not alone and you're not being irrational. That feeling has a name, and it shows up constantly in people your age. Here's the thing worth saying plainly. If your wake-up call about retirement didn't arrive until you were 55 or 60, that doesn't make you careless or somehow behind in a moral sense. You were probably paying off a mortgage, raising kids, or just getting through whatever life was throwing at you at the time. Those were the right priorities then, and they'd still be the right priorities if you were living through those years again. The shift that actually helps isn't about going back and reliving the last 20 years differently, because you can't do that. It's about changing what you measure going forward. Stop measuring how many years you've already spent in the market. Start measuring how efficiently you use the years you have left, particularly through that £60,000 pension annual allowance we talked about earlier. Used well, the next 5 years can outperform, in tax terms, what an extra decade of ordinary market growth would ever have given you. I remember a client who sat across from me at 61, genuinely shaking, because he was convinced he'd have to work until he was 80. He didn't need a 15-year plan built around the 843 rule. What he needed was a 3-year sprint focused entirely on using his tax relief while he still had earned income to relieve it against. That's really the whole shift. Not a bigger number to chase, just a shorter, sharper plan built for the years you actually have left, rather than the years you wish you'd had. Shame doesn't fill a pension pot. A clear plan for the years still in front of you does. So where does that leave the 843 rule? It's not useless. It's just built for a different job. It's a decent way to describe how a pension grows while you're still working and adding to it. It was never built to describe what happens once you stop adding money and start taking it out instead. That's what the 3-2-1 approach is for. It isn't about chasing a bigger number. It's about making sure an average return on paper doesn't hide the damage a single bad year can do right when you can least afford it. If there's one thing to actually do after watching this, check your state pension forecast on gov.uk and see the exact date your payments start and roughly what you'll get, since for most people that figure now sits around £12,547 a year. If you want help thinking through the ISA changes coming in 2027, the state pension age squeeze, and everything else landing on people in your position over the next few years, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. We're building an audience of people who care as much about sleeping well at night as they do about growing the pot. Retirement isn't the end of the road, it's just a different set of rules. Let's get them right.